Agatha Raisin and the Fortune Teller's Secret. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to Hidden Clue. I'm Jane, your guide through tonight's tale of intrigue and small-town secret. As we get comfortable, I'm curious, does the gentle coziness of winter warm your heart, or do you find yourself longing for sunny summer days? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for a fresh mystery every day. Now, settle in, relax, and let's dive into tonight's story. Chapter 1, The Village Fair in Forecast. The Cotswold Hills rolled by like painted waves beneath the afternoon sun as Agatha Raisin's car rattled along the familiar narrow lane. The hedgerows were budding, the air smelled faintly of damp earth and lilac, and in the distance the village of Carsely nestled as prettily as ever. After a few weeks in London, weeks of noise, pollution, and the unbearable cheerfulness of city people, Agatha was relieved to return to something resembling peace. She wasn't sure if she missed the gossip or the quiet more, but both would greet her soon enough. Her cottage waited just as she had left it, ivy climbing the stone walls, lace curtains still crisp from Mrs. Bloxby's careful laundering, and a cat sitting on the doorstep as if appointed guardian of her absence. Agatha sighed with contentment, unlocked the door, and set her handbag on the entry table. The familiar creak of the floorboards felt like an old friend clearing its throat to welcome her home. Within the hour, she had put the kettle on and retrieved a small tin of butter biscuits. Outside, the sound of distant laughter floated in. Curious, she opened the window and saw bunting strung across the green and bright tents rising beside the churchyard wall. The annual Carsely Spring Fair was underway, and as usual, Agatha had nearly forgotten it. She smiled wryly. Perfect timing, she muttered. Not even unpacked, and the circus begins. After tea, she strolled toward the green. The air carried the mingled scents of roasted almonds, flowers, and rain-soaked grass. Children darted between stalls, faces painted like rabbits and pirates. Local ladies competed for attention with trays of jam tarts and lemon drizzle cake. Agatha nodded to familiar faces, the vicar's wife arranging raffle tickets, Mr. Jessup boasting about his giant marrow, and Doris Simpson gossiping behind the cake table. For a moment, she allowed herself the comfort of routine, but one tent stood apart from the others. Draped in deep purple fabric, trimmed with golden tassels, it shimmered oddly in the light. A sign hung crookedly above the entrance: Madame Lavinia, reader of fortunes, keeper of secrets. Agatha tilted her head, intrigued. "Oh, good heavens," she murmured. Another clairvoyant come to part villagers from their pocket change. Yet curiosity stirred. She prided herself on being immune to nonsense, but she also adored uncovering it. Inside, the tent smelled of incense and dust. A single crystal ball glowed faintly on the table. Behind it sat Madame Lavinia, a tall woman with sharp cheekbones, silver hair pinned in elaborate twists, and a silk scarf of crimson wrapped around her neck. Her eyes, dark and steady, seemed to study Agatha before she'd even spoken. "Welcome, Mrs. Raisin," the fortune-teller said softly. Agatha's brows rose. "We've met?" "Not in this life," came the calm reply. "But your name carries whispers." Suppressing an amused snort, Agatha sat. "Very well, then. Tell me my fortune, provided it's not too ghastly." "I've only just made tea." Madame Lavinia spread a deck of worn tarot cards. Her rings glimmered as she drew one, then another. The Queen of Swords. The moon. Finally, the shadowed tower. The air seemed to cool. "You have keen eyes, Mrs. Raisin," Lavinia murmured, tracing the tower's edge with a pale finger. "They see what others overlook. But a shadow follows the lady of sharp eyes. A warning, perhaps. Be cautious where curiosity leads." Agatha straightened, trying to laugh, but the sound caught slightly in her throat. "A shadow? Well, that's delightfully vague. Does it have a name?" "Not yet," the fortune-teller said. "But it soon will." Outside, the fair music swelled, an accordion tune bright and cheerful. Agatha rose, adjusting her coat. "Thank you, Mud. I'll add mysterious warnings to my list of village amusements." Lavinia smiled faintly. "Amusement keeps fear at bay." As Agatha stepped back into the afternoon sun, the scent of flowers returned, warm and real. Yet the echo of the fortune-teller's voice lingered in her thoughts, threading through the laughter and music like a cool draught through an open door. The mist crept in early that evening, soft and low, curling around the stone cottages and winding lanes of Carsely. Lamps glowed behind lace curtains, and the faint sound of laughter from the pub drifted through the air. Agatha stood at her window, a mug of cocoa in hand, watching the streetlights dissolve into the fog. The village always felt smaller at night, the world shrinking to the glow of one's own doorway. She had been trying not to think about Madame Lavinia's strange words. A shadow follows the lady of sharp eyes. Nonsense, she told herself for the third time that evening. Still, she found her gaze flicking toward the green, where the fair's tents now stood ghostly and dim. Then she saw her, Madame Lavinia, unmistakable in her crimson scarf and long black coat, moving slowly through the mist toward the far lane that led past the old mill road. The fortune-teller's figure seemed to waver, half swallowed by fog. A moment later, Agatha noticed another shape behind her, a taller one, wrapped in a dark coat, keeping pace at a deliberate distance. Agatha leaned closer to the window pane. The two figures disappeared around the bend, swallowed by white air and silence. She frowned, debating whether to investigate, but reason and warmth won over. "Probably just someone escorting her home," she muttered, setting her mug down. This village could make a mystery out of a lamp-post. By morning, the fog had thinned, replaced by crisp sunshine and the smell of wet grass. Agatha awoke to the distant ring of the church bell and the hum of early gossip. When she stepped outside, Mrs. Cartwright from across the lane was already waiting with her gardening gloves on, pretending to prune the hedge. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin," she called, far too casually. "Terrible news, have you heard?" Agatha arched an eyebrow. "I've only just had my toast. What could possibly be terrible already?" "They say that fortune-teller woman's gone missing," Mrs. Cartwright whispered, leaning over the hedge. "Madame Lavinia." "Vanished in the night. Left everything behind." They found her tent locked up tight except for one thing, a silk scarf tied around that glass ball of hers. Agatha felt a ripple of interest chase away her morning drowsiness. "A scarf, you say?" "Red as blood," Mrs. Cartwright confirmed, dramatically. "Bill Wong's down there now with the constable. Says no one saw her leave." Agatha thanked her, and of course went straight to the green. The fairground was almost deserted, the bunting damp and drooping. Only a few villagers lingered, whispering among themselves. The purple tent looked smaller in daylight, the golden tassels dull. A constable stood guard outside while Bill Wong, earnest as ever, scribbled in his notebook. When he saw Agatha approaching, he sighed. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin. Don't tell me you're joining the investigation." "Not officially," she said with a smile, "but unofficially. I might lend my expertise." "What have we got?" Bill hesitated. Tent was found locked from the inside. No sign of struggle. Everything neat except... He gestured toward the table just inside the tent flap. That, on the crystal ball's smooth surface, lay the silk scarf, tied in an elegant knot. Its ends trailed like flames. Agatha stepped closer, noting the faint perfume clinging to the fabric, something floral with a hint of spice. The scarf caught the morning light, shifting between crimson and deep wine. "She didn't leave this behind by accident," Agatha murmured. Bill looked at her curiously. "You think it means something?" "I think," she said, eyes narrowing, "that people don't vanish into fog for no reason, and fortune-tellers rarely ignore their own warnings." The air stirred, carrying a faint chill from the empty fairground. Somewhere in the distance, a church clock struck 10. Agatha straightened, her curiosity fully awakened. Madame Lavinia's tent stood silent, her voice gone, but her presence lingered like the scent of her scarf, impossible to forget and full of unanswered questions. Chapter 2. Tea Leaves and Tensions. By the next afternoon, the village had recovered its usual rhythm, or at least tried to. Carsely had a remarkable talent for turning the mysterious into the mundane, though Agatha suspected the gossip would outlast the week. She decided it was time for a proper cup of tea and some reliable conversation. That meant Mrs. Bloxby. The vicar's wife arrived precisely at 3, wrapped in her sensible grey coat, carrying a basket of scones so fresh the butter had barely melted into them. Agatha ushered her in, waving away the cat that wound between their ankles. "Honestly, Mrs. Blocksby," Agatha began as she poured the tea, "you'd think the village had never seen a vanishing act before. Everyone's convinced the poor woman was spirited away by ghosts or eloped with a tax collector." Mrs. Blocksby smiled gently, folding her gloves on the table. "Carsely does love a good story." "But it is odd, isn't it? The constable said her things were all left behind. Not even a handbag missing." Agatha handed her a cup. "Exactly. A woman doesn't just walk out without her handbag. It's unnatural." "Even I wouldn't." They sipped in companionable silence for a moment, the clock ticking softly in the background. Through the window the lane shimmered with afternoon sun. "I asked around," Mrs. Blocksby said eventually. Mr. Jessop's cousin handled the cottage rental. It was all arranged through a London agency, paid in advance, no questions asked. The name she gave was Lavinia Ward. "Ward, is it?" Agatha repeated thoughtfully. "Sounds proper enough." "But why the secrecy? She could have taken a room above the post office like any other newcomer." "She said she needed privacy," Mrs. Blocksby replied, taking a delicate bite of her scone. "And apparently she kept a large trunk in the bedroom, always locked." "No one saw what was inside," Agatha's eyes gleamed. "A locked trunk. Now that's interesting." "I wonder what she was hiding. Tarot cards and incense, or something less." "Spiritual? Perhaps personal things," Mrs. Blocksby said. "A woman on her own might value her privacy," Agatha snorted. "Nonsense. Privacy's one thing. Mystery is another. And anyone who warns me about shadows and vanishes the next day earns my attention." Mrs. Blocksby looked amused but said nothing. She had learned long ago that Agatha's curiosity, once stirred, could not be put back in the bottle. Across the table, the teapot hissed softly. The cat jumped onto a chair, curling into a perfect circle as though to listen in. "I did hear something else," Mrs. Blocksby continued, "from Doris at the bakery, so take it as you will. She claims Madame Lavinia told her she wouldn't live to see another full moon." Agatha nearly choked on her tea. "Predicted her own death? Oh, that's marvellous." "You can't buy drama like that." Doris said it quite solemnly, Mrs. Blocksby added, though her eyes twinkled. Apparently the fortune-teller was frightened. She said someone had followed her from London. Agatha leaned back, tapping a finger against her cup. Then whoever she was running from might be right here now. "People don't just vanish out of superstition. Bill Wong will get to the bottom of it," Mrs. Blocksby said kindly. "Bill Wong," Agatha repeated, a touch of fond irritation in her voice. "He means well, but he's too polite for proper investigation." "No, Mrs. Blocksby, this one requires sharper eyes," Mrs. Blocksby smiled knowingly. "Yours, perhaps?" Agatha shrugged, pretending nonchalance. "If they happen to notice something, I can hardly help it." The vicar's wife rose to leave, pulling on her gloves again. "Be careful, Agatha. Shadows or not, this feels different." Agatha walked her to the door. "Careful?" "Always." She watched Mrs. Blocksby disappear down the lane, then turned back to the quiet cottage. On the counter sat the empty teacups, the faint steam rising like ghostly ribbons. A locked trunk, a vanished woman, and a fortune that refused to be forgotten. Agatha smiled to herself. Carsely, it seemed, had decided peace and quiet were overrated. The cottage sat at the far end of the village lane, half hidden by a tangle of ivy and hawthorn. It was smaller than Agatha had imagined. 2 windows, a crooked chimney, and a door that looked as if it had seen too many secrets. The path was slick from last night's drizzle, and the faint scent of damp wood hung in the air. Bill Wong stood beside her, notebook ready, his usual calm expression hiding the unease that hovered around them both. "Lovely spot for a vanishing act," Agatha remarked, adjusting her coat. "Picturesque enough to hide all manner of nonsense." Bill gave a small smile. "I'm not sure nonsense covers it." The back door was unlocked when we arrived. "No sign of forced entry, but the latch looks new." "Someone's been here since she disappeared." Inside, the air was still and faintly perfumed with incense. A kettle rested on the stove, cold but clean, as though it had been washed and set aside deliberately. The living room was neat, too neat. Every cushion plumped, every trinket aligned. Agatha's eyes narrowed. Either she tidied before running off, or someone came to erase the mess afterward. Bill knelt near the fireplace, examining the floorboards. There's something under here, but it wasn't the floor that drew Agatha's attention. It was the bedroom door at the end of the narrow hall. It hung slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beyond. She pushed it open, half expecting the air to change, and it did. The scent of lavender gave way to something metallic, faint but sharp. There it is, Bill said, stepping up beside her. Against the far wall stood the infamous trunk. It was large, heavy, and iron-bound, its lid split open along one hinge. The lock had been forced clean off, leaving a jagged edge. Agatha crossed her arms. So much for secrets. Someone found what they were looking for. Or didn't, Bill replied quietly. He lifted the lid carefully. Inside lay a scattering of cards, tarot, worn and faded, alongside bundles of yellowed letters tied with ribbon. The trunk smelled faintly of perfume and dust, the kind of scent that lingered from old things loved too long. Agatha leaned in. Letters, tarot cards, and... She stopped, reaching for something at the bottom, a photograph. It showed Madame Lavinia, younger perhaps, her hair darker, but those same sharp eyes unmistakable. Beside her stood a man in a tailored suit, hand resting on her shoulder. Around his neck hung a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon, pierced by a slender dagger. Bill whistled softly. That's not a common symbol. Look here, on the back. He flipped the photo to reveal faint writing. L and P, forever bound by fate. Agatha's lips tightened. Forever bound, are they? Sounds ominous. What do you make of that pendant? Bill studied it closely. Could be linked to one of those old travelling troupes. The Moonlight Circle, I think they called themselves. Fortune-tellers, mystics, con artists, depending on who you asked. Broke up years ago after a scandal. And our Madame Lavinia was one of them? Possibly, Bill said. If that's the case, someone from that circle might have reason to find her. Or silence her. Agatha looked around the small room, noting the bare floorboards, the single lamp, the faint outline on the dresser where something had once stood. No clothes, no handbag, no shoes by the door. She didn't just walk off. Someone took her, or whatever she had. Bill nodded, scribbling in his notebook. We'll send the photograph for prints. Do that, Agatha said, her gaze still fixed on the pendant. But I'll tell you something, Bill. Whoever that man is, he's the key. And not the kind you keep in your pocket. Outside, the clouds began to gather again, dimming the light through the cottage window. The open trunk sat in silence, its secrets half spilled, as though daring them to look deeper. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Reading Room. Rain lashed against the windows like handfuls of gravel, the sort of Cotswold storm that seemed to shake even the old stone cottages awake. Agatha Raisin sat by her fire, a tartan blanket around her knees and a half-finished crossword in her lap. Her cat, Hodge, snored in the armchair opposite, oblivious to the weather's tantrum. She was just considering whether to pour herself another small brandy when a sharp knock startled the quiet. Agatha frowned. At this hour? She muttered, glancing toward the clock, nearly midnight. Few souls in Carsely would dare disturb her this late, storm or not. Another knock followed, louder this time, hurried. She rose, cinching her robe tighter, and opened the door a cautious inch. Rain whipped in sideways, soaking the threshold. There, beneath the dripping brim of a wide hat, stood a young woman, pale, shivering, clutching a leather satchel to her chest. Her eyes were wide and frightened, her voice trembling. Mrs. Raisin, please. I didn't know where else to go. Agatha hesitated, then opened the door wider. Come in before you drown. The woman stepped inside, leaving puddles in her wake. She couldn't have been more than 25, dressed in a thin wool coat several sizes too big. Agatha motioned the fire. Sit. You look like a ghost. Thank you, the woman whispered, kneeling close to the warmth. Her hands shook as she tried to remove her gloves. My name's Clara. I worked for Madame Lavinia. Agatha froze mid-step. Worked for her? As what, exactly? Her assistant. For readings, mostly. I helped set up, keep the records, handle letters from clients. She took me in when I had nowhere else to go. Agatha studied her closely. And where exactly have you been since she vanished? Clara's eyes darted toward the window, where lightning flashed faintly through the curtains. Hiding in Mercester. But I saw the paper today. The police are looking.
I can't let them find me. Please don't tell anyone I came. Agatha folded her arms.
You turn up at midnight, drenched to the bone, begging secrecy. You'll forgive me for wanting a bit of explanation. She was scared, Clara said quickly. Before she disappeared, she kept saying someone from her past had found her again.
Someone dangerous?
That's why we came here, to start over. Someone from that Moonlight Circle troupe? Agatha asked, watching her reaction. Clara looked startled. You know about them? I make a habit of knowing things, Agatha said dryly. Go on. She left them years ago after
Something terrible happened.
She never told me what, only that she broke a promise she shouldn't have.
That man with the pendant, he was one of them.
She thought he'd finally tracked her down. Agatha leaned forward.
You've seen him? Once, Clara whispered.
Outside the cottage, the night before she vanished. He was standing by the gate, just watching. When I asked her who he was, she told me to lock the doors and say nothing. The next morning she was gone. Thunder cracked overhead, making the lights flicker. Hodge gave a low growl from the chair, tail twitching. Agatha rose and fetched a towel, handing it to Clara. You'll stay here tonight. We'll sort the rest in the morning. But Clara was already shaking her head. No, I can't. If he knows I'm here, he'll come for me too. Don't be ridiculous, Agatha said. But the young woman was backing toward the door, her eyes darting wildly toward the window, as though she'd seen something move beyond the glass. Thank you for the fire, Clara said softly. You shouldn't trust anyone who wears that pendant. Not even the ones who smile, before Agatha could reply. Clara pulled open the door and vanished into the rain. The storm swallowing her whole, Agatha stood frozen, listening to the wind whip through the hedges. Only the echo of that strange warning lingered in the air. Then, slowly, she turned toward the window. A shadow had passed across it, just for a heartbeat, tall, still, and watching. Morning came grey and heavy with mist, the sort that blurred the hedgerows and made the Cotswold lanes feel secretive.
Agatha sat at her kitchen table, a magnifying glass in one hand and a photograph in the other. The same photograph she and Bill had found in Madame Lavinia's trunk.
The man's face remained indistinct in the fading print, but the pendant gleamed clearly, a crescent moon crossed by a small dagger. She'd spent most of the night turning Clara's words over in her mind, unable to sleep. Now as the kettle hissed, she reached for her phone and called Bill Wong. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin," came his weary voice.
You sound like you've been up all night. I have. I want to know everything you can find about this symbol.
Crescent moon dagger through the middle.
And something called the Moonlight Circle. There was a pause, papers rustling faintly.
Moonlight Circle?
That rings a bell.
Give me an hour. I'll look through the archives. Agatha ended the call, poured herself a cup of tea, and settled by the window. Outside, the mist hung over Carsely like gauze, softening the shapes of the cottages and the budding gardens. For a fleeting moment she let herself enjoy the quiet, until she noticed it, a shape by the lane. Someone standing just beyond the hedge, still as a post. Watching, Agatha blinked, and the shape was gone. Perhaps only a delivery man, she reasoned, or a villager cutting through the footpath. Still her heart quickened. She drew the curtains halfway and told herself not to be silly. By mid-morning, Bill arrived at her door, notebook in hand and rein on his shoulders. He shook himself like a dog before sitting down. "You were right to ask," he said. The Moonlight Circle was a travelling troupe that roamed England in the 50s and 60s, fortune-tellers, illusionists, even a hypnotist or two. Based out of London. They disbanded after a scandal. What kind of scandal? Agatha asked, sliding him a scone. He took it gratefully. A missing heiress, name of Amelia Greaves, vanished during one of their performances near Oxford. Her father accused the troupe of fraud and worse, but nothing was ever proven. The case went cold. The papers mentioned a symbol associated with the group, moon and dagger. Same as the pendant. Agatha tapped her spoon thoughtfully. So Madame Lavinia once travelled with them, likely under another name, and now one of their number has come calling. Lovely. Bill gave a grim nod. If this man's still alive, he'd be well into his 70s now. Hard to say what he wants. She said someone had found her. Someone dangerous. Agatha's gaze shifted toward the curtained window again. Clara believed that. I think Lavinia did too. Bill jotted a few notes. I'll check local records, see if anyone matching that description's been renting rooms nearby. Maybe someone using a false name. Agatha reached for the photograph again, tracing the pendant with her fingertip. I'll handle the research side. The Historical Society in Mercester keeps archives on performance troupes and rural fairs.
I might just pay them a visit. Bill gave her a look of concern.
Don't go digging alone, Mrs. Raisin. If someone's been following you— Following me? She said, forcing a brisk laugh. Darling, half the village spies on me through their curtains.
I'm used to it. Still, when he left, she couldn't quite shake the sensation that eyes followed her movements through the cottage window.
The day passed quietly, yet each creak of the floorboards, each flutter of the curtain, seemed louder than it should be. As dusk settled, Agatha tidied the table and glanced once more outside. The mist had thickened again, swirling softly over the garden gate, and there it was, the faint glint of metal beneath the hawthorn hedge, a silver chain, half buried in mud, its pendant catching the last of the light. Chapter 4. The Whispering Woods. The morning after the silver pendant's discovery, Carsely awoke to the hush that follows a night of light rain.
Agatha stepped outside with her second cup of coffee, still in slippers and a tartan dressing gown, to breathe in the damp, earthy scent of her garden.
The clouds were lifting, revealing patches of pale blue sky over the rooftops. All seemed peaceful, until she noticed the footprints. They began at her back gate, clear as photographs in the soft mud. Heavy, deliberate prints larger than her own, leading away from her rose bushes toward the fields beyond. Agatha frowned, setting down her mug on the garden wall. She wasn't the sort to ignore such things. Pulling on her Wellingtons and grabbing a tweed jacket, she pushed open the gate and followed the trail. Each step squelched faintly in the moist earth. The air smelled of wet grass and daffodils just beginning to bloom along the fence line. For all the village's charm, there was something off about the quiet that morning, like a held breath. The footprints continued across the meadow, past the old beech tree, and into the narrow belt of woods that bordered the stream. Agatha paused at the edge. The branches intertwined overhead, dimming the light, and a breeze whispered through the leaves like faint voices. She told herself not to be fanciful, but the woods had always unsettled her slightly. Probably just some nosy rambler, she muttered, though the words didn't convince even her. She pressed on, careful not to slip on the mossy ground. Here and there, the footprints broke into smudges, then reappeared by a fallen log. Something white caught her eye, a scrap of paper among the brambles. She stooped to pick it up, a tarot card. Torn nearly in half, the edges damp and muddied. The illustration was mostly intact, the figure of a woman clutching a wand beneath a stormy sky. Agatha's pulse quickened. Another card lay a few feet away, then another, scattered like breadcrumbs through the clearing. She followed the trail deeper, collecting what she could. Some bore faint fingerprints in soot or ash. A shiver traced her spine. At last, she came to a patch of wildflowers where the tracks ended abruptly. On the ground before her rested the final card, half buried in wet leaves. The tower, its painted spire cracked in two by lightning, figures tumbling below. Across the face of the card, someone had drawn fresh ink lines, a crescent moon intersected by a dagger, the same mark as the pendant. Agatha crouched, holding the card in her gloved hand. The ink was still tacky. Whoever had drawn it had been here within hours. The woods were silent, except for the trickle of the stream nearby. A robin called faintly, then fell quiet again. She straightened, scanning the trees. No one in sight, yet she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. "Show yourself if you've the nerve," she called out, her voice sharper than intended. Only the wind answered, shifting through the leaves. After a long moment, she tucked the card into her coat pocket and turned back toward the village. The footprints she'd followed were already fading in the damp earth. By the time she reached her gate again, The path behind her looked almost untouched. Agatha stood for a while on her doorstep, staring at the distant line of the woods. The breeze lifted her hair, carrying the faintest scent of wood smoke and something else, faint perfume, floral and old-fashioned. She looked down. Another card fragment had caught against her shoe, its corner bearing the same inky crescent. She bent to pick it up, heart thudding with reluctant excitement. Whatever game was being played, she was now part of it. And Agatha Raisin, once again, had no intention of stepping aside. The woods looked different at night. Even with their lanterns, the trees seemed to press closer together, their branches like fingers reaching across the narrow path. Agatha and Bill moved cautiously, the glow from the lamps casting rippling gold circles on the wet ground. The scent of damp earth and pine was thick, mingling with the distant hoot of an owl.
"I can't believe I let you talk me into this," Bill muttered, ducking beneath a low branch. "It's nearly midnight, Mrs. Raisin. We could have waited for daylight." "And miss what?" Agatha whispered.
"Whoever's been skulking about won't be here in the morning. We need to see what they were doing out here." Their boots sank softly into the soil as they passed the spot where she'd found the scattered tarot cards earlier. The wind stirred the canopy, making it sound as though voices were whispering just beyond the reach of their light. Bill paused, turning his lantern slowly.
"Did you hear that?"
"Only the trees," Agatha said, though her voice wasn't entirely steady. Then faint and haunting came the sound of a melody. Soft notes, like a lullaby or music from a fairground organ, carried on the breeze. The two exchanged uneasy looks. Without a word, they followed the sound deeper into the wood, stepping carefully over tangled roots and fallen leaves. The music faded as suddenly as it had come, replaced by silence so complete it seemed to press against their ears. Ahead, the trees thinned, revealing a small clearing. The ground was uneven, patches of grass mingling with dark soil. In the center lay fragments of canvas, wood, and colored ribbon, the remains of a fortune-teller's tent. Agatha knelt beside a half-buried wooden stake, brushing off the dirt. "This fabric's the same shade of purple Lavinia used," she murmured.
"Her tent must have been moved here or rebuilt." Bill crouched opposite her, examining a torn scrap of bunting.
"Looks old. But there are fresh footprints." He angled his lantern, revealing clear impressions leading toward the far side of the clearing. "One set heading in, two coming out." Agatha followed his gaze. "Two?" He nodded. "One lighter, smaller."
"Maybe a woman." The night seemed to hold its breath.
Agatha's lantern flickered, shadows rippling over the remnants of the tent. Something glinted faintly beneath a clump of nettles. She reached out with her trowel and unearthed a small metal charm, its chain knotted with dirt. Wiping it clean with her handkerchief, she turned it over. "To L," it read, the engraving delicate and old-fashioned. "Lavinia," Bill said softly. "Or someone she loved," Agatha replied, her tone thoughtful. "Why bury it here?" Bill shone his light over the disturbed earth nearby. "Maybe someone didn't want it found." A sudden rustle made them both start. A fox darted from the undergrowth, eyes flashing amber before vanishing into the darkness.
Agatha laughed shakily.
"Good heavens, I nearly fainted." Bill gave a dry smile. "You?"
"Never." They lingered a moment longer, studying the clearing.
The air felt colder now, heavy with the scent of moss and rain. Somewhere in the distance a branch snapped. Both turned instinctively, lanterns swinging toward the noise, but nothing moved beyond the circle of light. "Let's head back," Bill said quietly. "We've seen enough for one night." Agatha nodded, slipping the charm into her pocket. As they retraced their steps, she glanced back once at the clearing. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw the faint outline of a woman's figure beside the ruined tent, head bowed, skirts stirring in the wind. When she blinked, the vision was gone, leaving only darkness and the distant shimmer of lantern light bobbing toward the village. Chapter 5. The Secrets We Keep. It was a grey morning, and the drizzle had returned, soft, unhurried, the kind that hung in the air rather than fell.
Agatha had just poured herself a second cup of tea when a faint knock came at the door.
She opened it to find Clara standing on the step, her raincoat plastered to her shoulders, eyes wide and hollow from sleeplessness. "Please," Clara said, her voice trembling. "May I come in?" Agatha ushered her inside without hesitation, fetching a towel and a dry cardigan. Clara clutched the mug of tea Agatha handed her as though it were a lifeline. "I shouldn't have disappeared," she said after a moment, staring into the steam. "I was frightened."
"I thought someone was following me." Agatha leaned back in her chair, keeping her tone steady.
"You've a talent for timing, my dear. Bill Wong's been hunting half the county looking for you. Care to explain why?" Clara swallowed, her eyes glistening. "Madame Lavinia wasn't just my employer. She was my aunt, Lillian Ward. She changed her name years ago after she left the troupe." Agatha's brows lifted. "The Moonlight Circle?" "Yes." Clara's voice softened. "My mother and she were sisters. They both performed when they were young, reading palms and telling fortunes at fairs. But Lillian was different. She believed in what she saw. It frightened her sometimes." Agatha said nothing, letting the silence invite more. "There was a man," Clara continued.
"Victor Harrow."
"He ran the circle. Charming, dangerous, the sort who could make you think the moon itself had promised him something. He discovered that Aunt Lillian kept a ledger, a book she called the Fate Ledger. She'd written down predictions she'd made for real people, ones that actually came true.
Names, dates, even deaths. Victor wanted it, said it could make them rich. Agatha frowned. "And did she have it?"
Clara nodded slowly. "She told me she destroyed it years ago. But lately, she feared he'd found her again. She said she kept dreaming of the tower, people falling, and a voice whispering her name." The image sent a chill through the room. Rain tapped gently at the window, like distant fingers. "She sent me away before the fair," Clara said. "Told me to go to Oxford and wait. But I came back when she stopped answering my calls. When I saw the police at her tent, I panicked." Agatha studied the young woman.
"You think this Harrow fellow's behind her disappearance?" "I don't know," Clara.
"But he'll be looking for the ledger still. And if he thinks I know where it is—" Her voice broke. Agatha reached across the table, resting a hand on Clara's. "Then we'll find it before he does. Together." Clara looked up, her eyes bright with mingled fear and relief. "You believe me?"
"I've learned not to dismiss a story just because it sounds strange," Agatha said dryly.
"Especially in Carsely." Outside, the rain eased to a drizzle. Somewhere far off, thunder murmured across the hills. Agatha rose to refill their cups, her mind already turning over possibilities. A missing ledger, a vanished fortune-teller, and a man from a shadowed past. It all added up to something worth finding. As she set the teapot down, Clara's voice came softly across the room. "She said the ledger could change a person's fate, if read by the wrong hands." Agatha looked up sharply, curiosity sparking behind her steady eyes. "Then we'd best make sure the wrong hands never find it." The next afternoon brought a rare burst of sunlight over Carsely, though Agatha had little time to enjoy it. Bill's call came just as she was pruning her roses. "I've found you, man," he said, voice brisk with excitement. "Name's Peter Vale, London-based antiques dealer, mid-50s, used to run a travelling appraisal tent. He's been questioned twice over stolen art pieces, but never charged." Agatha wiped her hands on her gardening apron. "An antiques dealer with a criminal hobby. How charming." "More than that," Bill continued. "He used to perform under a stage name, Harrow Vale. Ring any bells?"
Agatha froze, the shears halfway to a rose stem. "Victor Harrow?" "Exactly."
"He's changed names over the years, probably to stay ahead of trouble. I bet your Madame Lavinia knew him well." Within the hour, Agatha was on the train to London, her mind sharp with purpose. She carried a small velvet case containing a brooch she'd borrowed from her own collection. A modest piece, old but respectable enough to pass as something worth appraising. The shop lay on a quiet street near Bloomsbury, wedged between a tailor and a bookbinder. Its sign read Vale & Co. Fine Antiquities. The bell chimed as she entered. The air smelled faintly of polish and old paper, and the soft ticking of a mantel clock punctuated the silence. Shelves displayed porcelain figurines, silver trays, and curiosities in glass cabinets. From behind a desk rose a man exactly as she'd expected. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. His smile was smooth, almost too smooth. "Good afternoon," he said, voice low and cultured. "How may I assist you?" Agatha offered her most winning smile. "I've a brooch that might interest you. Late Victorian, I believe. I was told you were the man to see." He gestured to the desk. "May I?" She placed the case before him. As he opened it, Agatha's gaze drifted to the surface of the polished mahogany desk, and there it was. The pendant, a crescent moon crossed by a dagger, glinting faintly beneath a desk lamp. Her pulse gave a small, treacherous leap. Peter Vale studied the brooch with deft fingers, his movements practiced and unhurried.
"A lovely piece."
"Good condition, though the clasp's been replaced." "Sentimental value, perhaps?" "Something like that," she replied. He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You remind me of someone."
"Have we met?" Agatha forced a laugh. "I doubt it. I'd remember a man who runs such a charming establishment." He smiled again, yet there was calculation in his expression, the faintest edge beneath the courtesy.
"Charming, perhaps, but hardly profitable. People today care little for history." "Oh, I wouldn't say that," she countered. "Some histories have a way of catching up with us, don't they?" For a heartbeat, something flickered in his gaze, wariness, recognition, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He closed the case and slid it back toward her. "Not for sale, I think." "Sentimental pieces rarely are." She thanked him, her tone light, though every instinct told her to leave quickly. Still, curiosity made her linger a moment longer. "That pendant, an unusual design," she said casually, nodding toward the desk. He glanced down.
"A gift from someone long gone. A woman?"
"Of course," he said with a faint, humorless smile. "Aren't they always?" Outside, Agatha exhaled, her steps brisk as she walked toward the main road. The air felt cooler, sharper. She replayed his tone, his eyes, the way he'd lingered over her face as if testing a memory. Back in Carsely, she would tell Bill everything, but for now, she simply held on to one certainty. Peter Vale, or Victor Harrow, hadn't forgotten Lillian Ward, and judging by the glint in his eyes, he might not have forgiven her either. Chapter 6. Cards on the Table. The rain had returned to Carsely by the time Agatha set her tea table. The fire was lit, the silver polished, and the scent of lemon scones filled the air, a cosy trap laid with the precision of a chessboard. She had written to Peter Vale the day before, a cordial note thanking him for his kind attention in London and inviting him to take tea if ever he found himself in the Cotswolds. His reply had come astonishingly fast. "How delightful! I shall be passing through tomorrow." Now, as the clock struck 4, the crunch of tires on wet gravel reached her ears. Peter Vale entered with a gentleman's poise, his umbrella folded neatly, his smile as polished as his shoes. "You do keep a charming home, Mrs. Raisin." "Thank you," she said brightly. "One does what one can with the local help." They exchanged pleasantries, weather, countryside gossip, the virtues of Gloucestershire jam, before settling near the fire. Agatha poured tea, watching the man's hands as he accepted his cup, steady, practiced, and far too calm. "I was thinking about your shop," she began lightly. "You must come across so many curious things." "Indeed."
"Objects have such strange histories."
"Sometimes I wonder if they don't choose us rather than the other way round." Agatha smiled. How poetic.
"It reminds me of someone. Madame Lavinia, have you heard of her?"
For the first time his hand faltered. The teaspoon clinked against the saucer with a faint, betraying ring. "I can't say I have," he said, voice controlled, but not quite enough. "Oh, she was a fortune-teller," Agatha continued, deliberately casual. "Real name Lillian Ward, quite the character. She once claimed to own something called the Fate Ledger. Does that sound familiar?" He set his cup down.
"A superstition, surely." "Perhaps," Agatha agreed.
"Still curious how many people seem to want it." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You do have a taste for mysteries, Mrs. Raisin." "I suppose I do."
"They keep life interesting." The air between them tightened, each word a move on the board.
She leaned back, pretending ease.
"Another scone?"
"No, thank you. I must be going." He rose smoothly, yet when he reached for his gloves, Agatha noticed it, a smudge on his crisp white cuff, dark bluish-black ink. the same peculiar shade she'd seen before, staining the edge of the tarot card left in her garden. Her eyes flicked up. "You've had a busy morning," she said, voice mild. "Paperwork," he replied, sliding on his gloves with precision.
"A dull necessity," she smiled sweetly.
"Ah, but dull things often hide the most intrigue." At the door, he paused. "You're a very perceptive woman, Mrs. Raisin. Take care not to look too closely at shadows. You might find one looking back." And with that, he stepped into the rain. Agatha closed the door softly, her expression sharpening. The charm was gone now. What remained was calculation. She crossed to her desk, drew out the tarot card in its evident sleeve, and held it beside the faint ink stain on her fingertip. A perfect match. "Checkmate, Mr. Vale," she murmured, the fire crackling behind her like applause. The scent of roasted lamb and rosemary drifted through Agatha's cottage, mingling with the faint strains of Glenn Miller on the wireless. By 7, her small dining room was alive with laughter. Mrs. Bloxby, ever serene, Roy Silver, flamboyant and talkative, and Bill Wong, who had finally allowed himself to relax after a week of long shifts. Honestly,
"Agatha," Roy declared between bites, "if the BBC ever calls for a cooking segment—"
"You'll have them wrapped around your rolling pin," Agatha smirked. "They'd never survive my kitchen, dear."
"I frighten men who use the word infuse." The table rippled with laughter.
Wine flowed, and conversation drifted to the upcoming village fete, the new vicar's unfortunate singing voice, and the endless rain that turned every country walk into a mud bath. For a while, all was light and warmth, the kind of evening that reminded Agatha why she loved her peculiar little village. Then came the knock. Soft, 3 taps, followed by the faint scrape of something sliding beneath the front door. Agatha's laughter caught in her throat. The others noticed the change instantly. "Expecting someone?" Mrs. Bloxby asked gently. "Not at this hour," Agatha murmured, rising. She crossed the hallway, the cheerful clink of cutlery fading behind her. The envelope lay on the doormat, cream-coloured, unmarked except for her name, written in careful, unfamiliar script. She turned it over. No seal, no stamp. Whoever delivered it had done so by hand. Bill appeared beside her, brow furrowed. "Mind if I?" She shook her head, tearing it open herself. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper, the handwriting angular and precise. "You're asking the wrong questions, Mrs. Raisin," that was all.
No signature, no clue.
Just that quiet, unnerving certainty. Agatha felt the room behind her still as she returned to the table. Roy stopped mid-sentence. Mrs. Bloxby's eyes widened slightly. "What does it say?" Bill asked, already half rising. She placed the paper between the teacups.
"It says someone's been paying attention." Silence.
Even the clock on the mantel seemed to tick, louder than usual. The wind moaned faintly outside, pressing against the window panes. Roy tried to lighten the mood.
"Darling, if it's a secret admirer, they could use better stationery." Agatha forced a thin smile, but her mind raced.
Who knew she'd been asking questions? Who had seen Peter Vale leave her house that afternoon? Mrs. Bloxby's voice broke the hush.
"Agatha, perhaps you should lock your doors tonight." "Oh, I intend to," Agatha replied, folding the note and slipping it into her pocket.
"And tomorrow, I'll be asking the right questions." The warmth of the evening had dimmed, but Agatha poured more wine nonetheless, determined not to let fear take her table. The conversation resumed, lighter, forced, but under it all pulsed a new awareness. Somewhere beyond the rain-soaked lanes of Carsely, someone was watching, waiting, and very much aware that Agatha Raisin was getting close. Chapter 7. The Ledger of Fate. Rain whispered against the library's old windows as Agatha and Bill climbed the narrow staircase toward the attic. The air smelled of dust and lavender polish, the kind of scent that belonged only to buildings steeped in stories. Clara followed close behind, her lantern trembling in her grasp. "She told me once," Clara whispered, "that truth hides best where people least expect it." Among words, Agatha glanced back.
"And you're certain it's here?"
Clara nodded. The fate ledger, she said she couldn't destroy it, only conceal it.
"I think she feared what it contained." The attic door creaked open, releasing a breath of cold, stale air.
Rows of forgotten boxes stood beneath wooden beams, their labels faded to ghosts. Agatha set her lamp on an old desk, brushing away cobwebs. "All right," she muttered. "Let's see what your aunt considered safer than her own skin." For half an hour they sifted through piles of parish records and mouldy hymnals. At last, Bill's hand paused over a small chest tucked behind a stack of ledgers. It was bound in leather, the clasp shaped like a crescent moon. "This must be it," he said quietly. Agatha felt a shiver climb her spine. Together they lifted the lid. Inside lay a single book, bound in indigo leather so soft it seemed to hum beneath her fingertips. Gold embossed on the cover were 2 words, Fate Ledger. Clara stepped back, crossing herself. She said it recorded fortunes for the living, real names, real events. Some came true. Agatha opened it. The pages were filled with neat, looping handwriting in coded lines, symbols, numbers, and phrases that seemed to dance between logic and madness. Names appeared in the margins: Vale, Bloxby, Wong, and then, near the centre, she saw her own, Agatha Raisin. Her pulse quickened as she read the line beside it. "The seer's silence will cost her blood." The words seemed to vibrate on the page, sharp and deliberate. Bill leaned closer.
Could that mean Lavinia's silence?
"Or yours?"
Agatha closed the book with a snap.
"Either way, I've no intention of bleeding for anyone's prophecy." Clara looked stricken. She must have known something was coming. That's why she called it fate. Agatha studied the strange symbols curling around the entry. "No fate's written that can't be edited," she murmured, slipping the ledger into her satchel. "We'll take this somewhere safe before anyone else knows it exists." Lightning flashed through the attic window, illuminating their faces in pale gold. For a moment, Agatha thought she saw movement in the courtyard below, a shadow retreating into the rain. "Did you see that?" she asked sharply. Bill turned, peering through the glass. Nothing but trees, but Agatha wasn't convinced. She tightened her grip on the satchel, feeling the weight of the ledger against her side. As they descended the stairs, the wind rattled the windows again, 3 distinct knocks echoing faintly through the silence. Somewhere within those coded pages, Agatha sensed, lay not just Lavinia's secret, but a warning meant for her. And whatever truth waited to be uncovered, it was already watching. ChatGPT said, "The moon hung low over Carsely, a pale coin glinting between drifting clouds." Inside the village library, Agatha arranged her lamp on the reading table, its glow spilling across the ledger's indigo cover. The air was sharp with the scent of rain and paper, a stillness before the inevitable storm. Bill waited behind the stacks, silent but alert. They had agreed. No police sirens, no commotion. Just truth and capture, neat and tidy. At the stroke of 10, footsteps echoed through the hall. Peter Vale entered, impeccably dressed as always, silver pendant gleaming at his throat. He smiled when he saw the ledger. "Mrs. Raisin, I'm impressed. Most people would have burned it." Agatha folded her arms. "And deprive you of the satisfaction of finding it? Hardly. I thought you might prefer to collect it in person." He stepped closer, gloved fingers tracing the edge of the book. "You've done well. Lavinia would be proud. She always had an eye for intelligent women." His voice softened mockingly. Shame she lacked self-preservation. Agatha's heart gave a tiny skip, though she kept her expression steady. "You speak as though you knew her well." Peter chuckled, the sound cold as frost. "Knew her? She tried to expose me. The old fool believed she'd found some moral duty in that little ledger of hers. I warned her to keep quiet." Agatha's voice dropped to a near whisper, but she didn't. He lifted his gaze to hers, moonlight carving the sharpness of his features. "No, and so she met her fate. I couldn't risk her linking my name to the forgeries. Those ledgers financed a lifetime of comfort. Imagine losing that to a fortune-teller." Behind the shelf, Bill's jaw tightened.
Agatha kept him waiting, sensing the moment was close.
Peter turned the ledger toward himself.
"I'll take this."
"You've meddled enough for one village woman." Agatha's eyes flicked to the pendant glinting beneath his collar, the crescent moon and dagger, its silver catching the lamp's light. "You know," she said calmly, "I rather thought it suited you. The moon for deceit, the dagger for guilt." His smile faded. "What did you say?"
"You silenced her, didn't you?"
Just as the prophecy warned, the seer's silence would cost her blood. Something dark flickered in his eyes. His hand moved to his coat pocket. Before he could draw the knife, Bill stepped from the shadows, his voice firm. "Peter Vale, you're under arrest for the murder of Lillian Ward, known as Madame Lavinia." The blade flashed once in the lamplight, but Bill was quicker. The two men collided against the table, the ledger sliding to the floor with a dull thud.
Agatha snatched it up, heart pounding. "Easy, Bill!"
she called, as the struggle ended in a crash of overturned chairs. Peter's knife clattered away. Bill cuffed him, breath steady despite the scuffle. "You really should have listened to your own fortunes," he said dryly. Outside, the clouds parted, bathing the library in silver. Agatha gazed at the ledger, its pages fluttering softly as though exhaling a long-held secret. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a deep breath. Justice, like the moon, had finally come full circle. Chapter 8. Tea, Fate, and Closure. The first light of dawn poured gently over Carsely, brushing the thatched roofs and cobbled lanes with the soft gold of renewal. After weeks of drizzle and unease, the village finally felt at peace. From her kitchen window, Agatha watched sparrows dart between hedges, their wings catching in the sunlight. The kettle began to hum, and she smiled. Tea at last, without mystery attached. The morning paper lay folded beside a plate of toast. Its headline was small, discreet, "London dealer arrested in connection with Cotswold disappearance." Agatha took a satisfied sip of her tea. "At least they didn't use my name this time," she muttered. Moments later, there was a soft knock at her door. Mrs. Blocksby appeared, wrapped in her lavender shawl, a basket of warm scones in hand. "I thought you might need fortifying after last night's adventure," she said, with a kind smile. Agatha ushered her in. "You do know how to make an entrance, Blocksby." "Tea's just brewed." As they sat, the familiar rhythm of Carsely life floated through the open window, children laughing near the green, the baker setting out fresh loaves, the faint clang of church bells in the distance. The world, it seemed, had exhaled. "I suppose everyone knows by now?" Agatha asked, buttering a scone. Mrs. Blocksby chuckled softly. By breakfast, half the village had heard. By lunch, they'll all have opinions on your bravery, your shoes and your tea set. Agatha smirked. "I wouldn't expect anything less, though I imagine I'll be blamed for frightening poor Doris at the post office again." Mrs. Blocksby's eyes twinkled. "You did, after all, drag a murderer into her queue." "Details," Agatha said lightly, taking another sip. A gentle tap sounded from behind them. Clara stood in the doorway, a small suitcase at her side, her expression both nervous and hopeful.
"I wanted to say goodbye before the train." Agatha rose and gestured her in.
"Come along, dear. You've earned a cup before you go." Clara sat quietly, folding her hands around the mug Mrs. Blocksby handed her. "I don't know how to thank you both."
"Aunt Lillian would have wanted peace, and now perhaps she has it. You're certain about London?"
Agatha asked. Clara nodded.
"There's a job waiting at a small publishing firm. Nothing grand, but it's honest."
"And I've had my fill of secrets for one lifetime." Agatha smiled. "You'll do splendidly."
"A bit of city life might do you good, provided you avoid any gentleman with silver pendants." Clara, a sound lighter than Agatha had ever heard from her.
Then she reached into her bag and withdrew a folded square of silk, the same one once draped around Lavinia's crystal ball. She said it was meant for the person who'd see the truth clearly, no matter how clouded it looked. "I think that's you, Mrs. Raisin." Agatha accepted it gently, the fabric cool and delicate in her hands. The scarf shimmered faintly in the sunlight, its pattern of stars and moons catching her eye. "Well," she said after a pause, "it's rather too fine for dusting shelves. I'll keep it as a reminder that even fortune-tellers can be outguessed." Clara smiled through misty eyes.
"Goodbye, Agatha."
"And thank you." When she'd gone, Mrs. Blocksby set down her teacup. "You've a gift for attracting trouble, you know." Agatha sighed.
Nonsense. Trouble just finds me. Rather persistent. The two women shared a quiet laugh, and for a moment, the world was still again.
Outside, the church clock struck 9, and sunlight warmed the ivy creeping up Agatha's cottage wall. As she refolded the silk scarf, Agatha glanced toward the garden gate. A faint trail of muddy footprints had already faded into dew. Life, she thought, had a way of washing away even the darkest marks, though she suspected another mystery was already making its way toward Carsely. She poured herself one last cup of tea and smiled. "Well," she murmured, "fate or not, I'm always ready." Evening settled gently over Carsely, the kind that painted the clouds in lavender and rose. The village green lay hushed beneath a veil of mist, and the soft patter of rain began against Agatha's window panes. Inside, her cottage glowed with the amber warmth of lamplight. The fire crackled low, and the scent of chamomile drifted from the teapot on her table. She had promised herself an early night. No visitors, no puzzles, no lingering thoughts of ledgers or murderers. Yet, as she drew the curtains closed, something caught her eye on the outer sill. A small, water-speckled card pressed beneath the window latch. Agatha frowned, opening the window just wide enough to retrieve it. It was a tarot card, the star. The illustration shimmered faintly, the woman pouring water into a calm pool beneath a sky of 7 bright stars. At the bottom, in faded ink, were 3 words written in a hand she recognized. "Your light endures." For a long moment, Agatha said nothing. The rain whispered against the glass, and somewhere outside the wind carried the faint chime of the church clock striking 8. She turned the card over in her hand, tracing the edges. "Well, Lavinia," she murmured, "you always did have a flair for the dramatic." Placing the card beside her teacup, Agatha eased into her chair. The scarf Clara had given her lay draped over its arm, the silk catching the lamplight like moonlit water. Everything felt unusually still, peaceful, but tinged with a quiet kind of wonder. She poured herself another cup of tea, the liquid amber and fragrant. Steam curled upward in soft ribbons, blurring the edges of the room. Outside, droplets clung to the rose bushes. Trembling with each breath of wind, Agatha leaned back, letting her gaze wander to the small stack of papers on her desk. Unfinished notes, a few unanswered letters, a village newsletter she hadn't yet read. Life, she thought, had a habit of moving on whether or not one asked it to. Her eyes fell once more on the tarot card. Star, hope, renewal, light after darkness. How appropriate. She could almost hear Lavinia's voice, low and knowing. "Every reading ends where it began, Mrs. Raisin, with the seeker's heart." Agatha smiled faintly. "If that's your way of saying I've earned my rest, I'll take it." The fire popped softly, sending a small burst of sparks up the chimney. She sipped her tea and watched the rain streak down the window, silver lines against the night. Beyond them, the world shimmered with quiet possibilities. The next case, the next whisper, the next curious knock on her door. But not tonight. Tonight belonged to stillness, to soft endings, to the comfort of being alive and awake in a world that still had mysteries left to tell. Agatha set the empty cup down, glanced once more at the card, and smiled. "You're lighting," she whispered. "Well, mine too, I should think." Then she drew the curtains, leaving the fire to fade and the rain to sing her gently towards sleep.